Hello everyone. I'm going to explain our next project, which is the fourth main project that we're doing, which is called Loops and Layers. Um, just created the assignment, and if you go to instructions, I kind of broke it down over 5 days. Usually this is something that does take a full week. So you should take a little bit of time each day, or if you want to take about 2 hours or so to complete the project, that should probably be enough. So let's go over the instructions, and I'll leave this open, and I'll open up a Soundtrap window as well as Mixcraft. So for this project, we should take again about 4 or 5 audio tracks. Actually, I'll create 6 just for this, and then just press OK. You can see I have 6 tracks here. Here I will in Soundtrap. You don't have to create tracks because they will auto-populate kind of on their own. But this is what we're looking at here on the loops side. If if nothing is, you can kind of close this. This is your regular, if it's full screen, this is your regular window. This is your regular window. I'm just going to keep the my face on the side here. You see this little purple icon with the notes on it. If you click on it, it opens the loops library. In Mixcraft, you just go over to the library tab on the bottom left, and you kind of have again, about 8,000 or so loops. In Soundtrap, it doesn't give you the number, but it's a good amount of loops. So that's what we are all doing here in this project. If I open up the instructions again, so we're going to open up the Soundtrap or Mixcraft, and we're going to create a new session, and this is all going to be in grid mode. If you'd like, you can change this, but I would like to leave this at 8 notes. And same thing over here. Before we even do anything, turn on grid mode and make sure it's set to 8 notes. Again, you can change it as you would like, but that's a good place to start. You're going to set a desired tempo. In this case, in Mixcraft, you have this it's actually an old school metronome. But if, for example, you just click on the metronome and click playback, and then you just press play, it should start going. Maybe there's no audio file, so it doesn't want to play. Okay. So that's okay. In terms of the metronome, just on its own in Soundtrap, so in this case, it's set to 120. You can just hear it going, and it's clicking. You can see it's marking time there. And you can basically, if you zoom in, you would see that it's clicking a higher pitch on one of each measure. So you can see this is measure 1, and then the higher pitch click on 1, and then 2, 3, 4 are lower pitch, and then again higher click, 2, 3, 4 lower pitch again. So that's just giving you a set tempo, a speed, the pulse of the song, and you can change the speed. I'll just make this a little lower so it doesn't hide. You can click on tempo, and you can either tap a tempo in, and after 4 clicks, it's going to tell you what tempo approximately. If you go a little faster, it will adjust that click. But you can also do it manually. You'd say 132. It's going to be a little quicker. For the sake of this project and this demonstration, I'm just going to leave that at 120. I guess this doesn't play yet because there is nothing to play. But I'll demonstrate that in a second. So you want to set desired tempo because the loops that you pick for the project will be adjusted to the tempo that you set. So again, I showed you how to open the loops library. So it's just the loops in Soundtrap and just library in Mixcraft. You're going to browse through and play or preview a loop. So you can, if you want, there is, or there are different themes. So if you want something that, if you have a specific genre of music, like, for example, dance hall. So this is all going to be kind of dancey, and they give you a style and an instrument, and they give you the original tempo. So you can see this is 115. Yours is going to be set to 120, or at least that's a default setting. So this may or may not work. So let's see just the saxophone riff number 3, and you click this little play button. So you can actually see that, or you can hear that it's a 2-measure riff, 2-measure melody, and then the last 2 measures is kind of just a decay in terms of volume, a little reverb. So let's say you want to use this as your maybe an effect or a melody, and you just simply click and drag that into any of the audio tracks, and then it says that the sound is in different tempo than your project for the best results. Would you like to change your project to match this sound? You want to say no. You want to set the tempo here. So if you would like, you can set this, let's say 112. You want to slow it down. It's going to adjust to that saxophone. And you hear that metronome clicking. You can see there's nothing really playing, but there is a little pickup right at the end. Because this is meant to loop, right? Just right at the end. It's meant to loop for that, for this little melody. So you can see it's really just 2 measures, and then there's kind of nothing happening for 2 measures, and then it goes again. And then you actually loop by clicking this little button, which says +1 loop. Let's make this a little taller so you can see a little better. So this is my melody, and you can click +1 loop, and it will just add 1 more loop. So this is a 4-measure loop. It's from 1 through the end of measure 4, and then this is the beginning of measure 5. So if you play this again from the beginning, and it will just continue and continue. Now, if you would like to end the loop, I would definitely recommend that you get rid of this because it's meant to be as a pickup to the beginning. So if you're, simply not continuing the loop, I would recommend that you not use it. And you can see if you start to drag it, it's going to, again, just to go on and go on and go on. So in this case, let's just say I'll leave it at 2 rounds. And just leave it as this, and we'll see where we go from there. In Soundtrap, I'm going to do the exact same thing. You do have like a little search, so if you go to, if you just put in guitar, you can kind of see the things that come up, and some of these are new, whatever that means to you, which doesn't really mean anything. But let's say you have lean space, right? You can click on. So I want something a little more upbeat, I guess. Again, there's something happening in the beginning, but not a lot towards the end. So I'm just going to find some. Yeah, okay. So this is a mandolin, but it's very close to guitar, which is probably why it comes up under guitar. But again, you can just click and drag it, wherever you want. In this case, we're going to start right in the beginning. I'm going to expand this so I can see a little bit better. And again, you can zoom in, zoom out. So you can see that this loop is exactly 8 measures from 1 through the end of measure 8 and starting measure 9. So in this case, if I just go back to the beginning, click play. actually not a fan of this because it just kind of goes on and on and on. And actually, I'm not sure why it decided to make an 8-measure loop, because it's actually just a 4-measure melody. And I can tell that because there's a little notch right here between, right on measure 5, there's a little notch, which means that this is one, audio track, which was looped, and it was, it really ends right here. So I'm not sure why. Let's just try it with, a pop guitar loop. So maybe having to do with this. I'm not sure why there's why this is on, but let's just drag this in. You can see it's a 1-measure loop. Okay, so this is an 8-measure loop. There is no notch in the middle, so this is just one 8-measure melody. Okay, so that's basically it. If you wanted to repeat that one, you would just click this loop button, and you would hold, click and drag. You would hold it through, another cycle. Again, you don't have to repeat the exact same thing if you don't want to, but that's going to be up to you in terms of making this project. You should note that this is an 8-measure loop. So if you decide that you're going to only repeat 6 measures of it, it may not work out very well in terms of the melody concluding and having that satisfaction of ending on the correct note. Sometimes if you break the melody in the middle somewhere, it's not going to necessarily line up melodically. So day 1 project is to really just look through, and there's a ton of them. You just want to listen through many loops. I would say don't just find the first 6 loops and drag them in. It's not necessarily the best. So again, just look through, listen through. They're not long, a few seconds each. Take some time, go through different genres. Don't worry about the scales. If you want, you can, if you want to make a minor melody or major melody, sometimes they're not listed, so it may limit a lot of that. Same thing in Mixcraft here. They do have categories. There is a little search bar. Again, if you put in, if you put hip hop, for example, it doesn't come up with anything because there's a dash. So maybe if you put a space, it's going to give you some items, but maybe some of them aren't listed. So if you just put hip, it's going to give you anything in that search criteria. So again, just you can use it if you'd like, but know that if it doesn't have a style or something associated with it, or different authors, don't categorize them. For example, keys and stuff. It may not necessarily come up in the search result. So just experiment and find something that you like, and then continue for the day 2 stuff. And there should be a little space here so you can actually see how to do this. I'll add little dashes. But find and use 4 to 6 loops to create an 8-bar phrase. A bar is a melody, right? Or I'm sorry, a bar is a phrase. A bar is a measure. So an 8-bar phrase is going to be an 8-measure phrase. So this was originally a 4-measure loop. Now it's, I doubled it. I added another loop to it. Now it's 8 measures. So let's find some, 80s video game music may not necessarily work for this, but if you go through some techno, that's a saxophone riff. So it's giving some melody, but I don't have a bass or a rhythm really. I just have a little bit of a melody, but it's like, just taking up the first 2 measures, nothing happening 3 and 4. So I have to find something to fill that in. So let's find a groovy bass. So you can see this is recorded at 130. I'm at 112 now. So if I bring that in, it will adjust. And just to see how it sounds on its own, I'm going to mute the saxophone. So you can see it's a little slower than the 130 original that you had the preview on. and that's it. So in this case, I'm going to add I like it enough, I'm going to add another loop, and then I'm going to unmute this so you can see this is a lot louder. So I'm going to take the saxophone down a little bit in terms of volume, which is the main bar right over here, sliding across. And you know what? That doesn't really work. So I'm going to delete the bass and find something that may work a little better. So let's go up to all and put in bass and see what we come up with. And just for this, I'm going to just scroll down the middle and see if I can find something. Let's see. See how that works. Okay, I'll come back to this. Same thing here. We have a pop guitar rhythm. There's a little bit of a melody. Okay, this one loaded. So you can try this one, see how this one works. Add one more loop. I think that works better. I'm not going to take a lot of time, just for your sake, to find something that is, ideal in my mind. But I think this works well enough, and you do have to play a little bit with volume to make sure that both are. This one is this bass riff is a lot louder than the previous one, so I may need overall may not need to bring down the saxophone that much. I still think it's a little too much. I like the sounds, how they sound together. So I have a bass, I have a saxophone, I need some percussion. So let's find some percussion, and it could be drums. It could be a drum set, which is a full percussion. As you'll see, some of these are, I guess it's just loading everything, but some of these are full, like a percussion section, and some of these are just one percussion instrument, one little percussion effect. Maybe it's a cowbell or a little ding. So you'll see that some of these are full, if it's just a kick drum or keys, right? Which is maybe not very musical. But then we have a fill, right? The full drum fill is going to have a lot of instruments. So something like this may be a little too much. And that's one thing, especially if it's only a one measure fill. If you just have this going the entire time, you may go into the problem of having too much going on with your loops, right? With your just general project. If you just have the drums and, it's a very busy drum fill, and this is a very busy bass riff, even together, there's a lot going on. So I'm not going to necessarily use this for the entire 8 measures, but maybe I'll use it. These are linked, but maybe I'll add it right at the last measure, because that's what the fill is supposed to do. You're just kind of adding a little bit more rhythm to something that may just be a kind of like a standard fill. So let's start with, again, some of these are just single notes. So this one's okay. Let's see how this one works. So this is a 4 measure fill or 4 measure loop, and we know what this sounds like. So let's just play it all together. And I'm going to mute the saxophone. I just want to see how the rhythm section, the bass and the drums work together. how the drum fill is acting in this case. So maybe over here, when the drum fill comes in, I can add a little, decrescendo, make it a little quieter, keep it down for a little bit, and then bring it back to regular volume. So some of you may have worked with that a little bit. And in this case, I'll just keep it like this, right? Just to add some little adjustment. Because we have this very loud, very busy fill. If I have that and the other percussion, mixed beat, it's just going to be too busy. And if we add the saxophone back in, let's see what it sounds like. So I think that sounds okay. Of course, we are missing something here, so let's find another melody. Hawaiian. Let's see if we can find pedal steel. So in this case, I just want to fill in maybe 1 or 2 measures. I don't need a full 8-measure loop. So find ukulele. This may not work, but let's see how it goes. And I'll start this, let's say I start this on measure 3. So that's not my favorite, but again, for the sake of time, I'm just going to cut this to 2 measures and again bring them in here. So that, in essence, is what the project is all about. You're going to find loops that work well together. I think this one, you can see that some of them are in different keys. This is in the key of C. The saxophone doesn't tell me what key it's in. The bass doesn't tell me what key it's in. Drums don't really have a key. These are rhythm instruments. They're not pitched percussion. So in this case, you may want to, again, actually go into the sound, and it says original key was G. So maybe saxophone, you can see saxophone is in C. This one's in B, so you can actually change that and change that to C. This, again, doesn't have transposition, and this one is in G, so maybe if we bring this down to C, this may all work a little better. So let's see how that goes. It's a little better. But that's essentially what you are doing in this project. And it's exactly the same thing here. This is our pop guitar. Maybe you like this bass loop. You'll bring that in. You'll see if you like how they sound together. So this is bass. This bass is a very high-pitched bass, so it doesn't, but they work well together. You can actually, you listen to it and you can't really tell them apart almost. So that's, for example, something that does work very well. And then let's see if we can find some drums. I saw percussion. There's a wood block. Again, these are very similar, so some of them are just one instrument, some of them as a whole. You can see different instruments, but some of them are full percussion kits, and others are just, single instruments. If you go to drums, you might find some more, right, classic And in that case, you may not want to use this, the wood blocks the entire time. Maybe you can see it's actually just one measure loop, and it just repeats 8 times. So maybe you want to just maybe use it twice and just kind of move it so that it's towards the end. Make a copy and see what that sounds like. Again, you can adjust the volume. I think the wood block is cool, but it's a little too loud. It's just there for effect. I would make the drums a little louder. Maybe put the guitar a little. And again, you can add a fade. You can do a fade in. Just so you want to start with that right away. Kind of lay a foundation first and then add the instruments in. So that's my next part. Now that we have, one kind of a drum beat, you have some percussion loops for additional voices, additional sounds. You have a bass and you have some melodic loops. So between 4 and 6 loops total is your goal. And you're going to create, at the beginning, just 8 measures, something that works in your opinion, something like this. Day 3, you're going to copy that A section, which is now the 8-bar phrase, the 8-measure melody is now your A section. If you go over here, I give you a little, actually 2 different forms. One is just a form sheet where it says starting in measure 1 is your first A section, measure 9 is your second A section. Then you have a B section for 8 measures, and then you have an A section again starting at measure 25. I gave you a visual from Pro Tools, so same exact thing. Section A, the first section A is measures 1 through 8. Then 9 through 16 is the second section A, section B, 17 to 24, and section A2, 25 to 32. So it should look somewhat like this. And what is the point here? So in this case, I'm going to copy the entire thing. I'm going to make an exact copy from 9 to 17, and again from 25 to 32. Not 17 to 25, but 25 to 32. And if you zoom out, you should see 3 exact copies. And I'll do the same thing in Soundtrap. Again, select everything, make a copy. Select everything, select everything, make a copy, but not 17 to 25, 25 to 32. And if you zoom out, you will see that, again, you have 3 exactly the same sections. Now, you want to add some variety. You don't just want to repeat everything, 2 or 3 times, because that is boring. So I'm just going to delete stuff. I don't want to start right with the saxophone riff, but when I do, I am going to incorporate that last beat, because that's a pickup. Maybe I don't want to start the next beat right away. Maybe I want to start it here. And even on top of that, maybe I want to add a fade for the first couple measures. So I go to Sound, Envelope, Fade in, and I just want to do a medium fade. I'll adjust it if I want to. Ukulele, the first one I don't need. I'm just going to delete it. So let's start, and this is now my first 8 measures with a little variety. And then for the second 8 measures from 9 to 17, I add my saxophone, which is a little bit like my first, my second melody, which ukulele starts a couple measures before. So you can see that I'm not starting all of the instruments all at once. It's going to be way too busy. I want to introduce the listener to the sounds, to the various instruments one by one, so they can get into it. And it's easier to add, something, start with 1, add a second, add a third, add a fourth, rather than to bring 4, 5, 6 different instruments all together at the same time. So let's see what it sounds like. okay. In my opinion, I don't think ukulele really matches. I like the build up that's happening here, but something from 5 to measure 7 doesn't really work. Just having all those, just bass and drums with no melody doesn't really work for me. So in this case, I'm going to move the ukulele over a little bit and continue that melody a little bit. However, if I had a little more time, I would pick a new melody because I really don't like how the ukulele fits with that. For the sake of this demonstration, I'll keep it. So again, just a little. It's definitely a good spot for a melody. I just don't like that melody or the sound of the ukulele, how it doesn't really fit with the bass or the drums. But for the sake of this demonstration, I'll leave it. Same thing here. You don't want to just bring all the instruments in. I know there's nothing, on beat one necessarily, but I still have my bass and vintage drums, and then I have a little fade in. Once this is fading in, you actually don't need a fade in over here, right? You introduced the instrument already. You shouldn't need to fade it in. The fade in is right at the beginning. Maybe I do a little fade out, actually. The last time it happens, I'll do a little fade out. But in this case, let's listen to it and see what I like. So what I like, I'm actually going to take out one of the loops and bring out 2 of the loops and bring it like this. So I do like the bass melody. I think it sets a nice foundation. And then I slowly bring in the pop guitar over, let's say, 2 measures, a little bit more. I fade that in, and then I bring in my salsa woodblock. And then after that, I bring in my vintage drums over here, disco drums. Actually, I'm going to cut this to 1 loop. I'm going to adjust the start a little bit and bring the fade like this. So we just start with 1 melody, fade in the guitar, then we bring in the wood block, which leads right into the disco drums. You can see that in this case, the loop is selected with the purple bar here. You can either extend it, so it's just going to loop over and over and over, or if you click on it, it turns it off. So you can see a little loop function here as well. That just makes it easier if you're working on loops, instead of clicking play and pause all the time, it makes it a little easier. But that's the idea here. So same thing, maybe towards the end, you want to adjust a few things. But the essence of the project, if we go back to this, is that your A sections, right? The first A section is introducing the instruments. I did a very plain one for this demonstration in Pro Tools. So you start with a bass, then you have a little shuffle, which is the drum riff. Then you have the organ, which is kind of like a rhythm. And then your fuzz bass is the last thing, which is more melodic than this original bass. So you can see I'm introducing instruments. I have a fade, introduce some more instruments. I also have manual volumes that I put in. And then, so again, from first section A is just introduction of the sounds, and second section A is kind of your main melody, your main riff. And then the last section A is, again, all the instruments, they're all present, and then you do a little fade out. You play with the volumes a little bit, but all the instruments are there. Section B, as you probably imagine, is different from all of the A sections, right? So you're creating a completely new melody in that section. So in this case, I have something that kind of works. I'm not in love with the ukulele sound, but it works for this demonstration. I'm actually going to delete this last one, so we have a little bit of variety. Same thing as the fill at the end. Maybe I'll bring it to the second second to last, and then I add a fade to, let's see, add 4 again. A little fade towards the end, and maybe I, since there is no riff here, I'll just kind of slowly fade this out just a little bit to see how the end, works out. And same thing with the saxophone. Don't need that one last pickup. No. So now I have my kind of introduction where I start with 1. I start with 1. I add a second. I add a third. I add a fourth. Not all instruments are playing at the same time. And once it plays, repeats, then I want a new section. So in this case, let's do the exact same thing. Let's see if there's a ukulele I like. No, I'm not gonna like any of this. So let's find Industrial Dance. This could be cool. So this is more for an effect again. So kick. It's only a 2-bar kick, and I not necessarily want to match everything exactly, but if I have a percussion loop, I probably want to add some percussion in there. So in this case, I don't have a specific bass loop or drum bass, right? Bass drum, talking backwards. I don't have a specific bass drum loop, so I'm just going to create a new instrument here, a new line. And let's add some, a synth. So this could be cool again with an effect. It may not work as an instrument kind of on its own, but let's put that into the saxophone because that was an effect as well. As you can see, it's only one. If you zoom in, you can see it's only one hit in a sense. So we're not gonna put that right in the beginning, but we'll put that. Let's put that right on measure 21, which is between 17 and 25. It's right in the middle. Just going to add a little effect, kind of where the saxophone was. Let's add. We definitely need some bass. So let's see if we can find a bass. More synthesized. So this is in the key of D. This may need adjustment as well, but I'm going to add the bass where the bass is. Again, this is a 2-measure block, so this may or may not work because it's just not as much happening. So maybe you want to add a little fade over time and just make it more interesting because it's only a 2-measure melody, repeats 4 times. Do something with it that is not just the same 2 measures going on and on. Actually, I like that one better already. So this one's a 4-measure melody. Add one more, make it a little more interesting the second time around. Maybe you do want to add this in a little bit, and then you could either loop something or you can just make a copy of it. That's another way to do it. In this case, I'm just adding some effect here, so I'm just working on this, and I need some. I'm not sure if samba will actually work well, but I think this may work. So let's see if we can put some guitar in here. You can see it's exactly an 8-measure melody. May need to do very much with it. Let's see if we can find a kit, some kind of a drum kit, and see drums. Yeah, this one's nice. So let's just add that in, add a couple loops, and just see how it sounds, right? So this guitar just doesn't work. It just doesn't work with this. So I'm having trouble finding a specific mandolin. Let's see if this works. I'm not having luck finding a a nice melody instrument. But that's why day one stuff is really just to play through a lot of different loops and see what you like and see what works together. Find stuff that works well together. Not all of this just because it's here, put it together and it's, magically going to work. It's not. So let's bring it back a little bit and see how we can get into the new melody. Okay, so what I decided is that I do like how the mandolin works with the other instruments, but while the kick is kind of providing a nice steady beat, once it's done here, I don't have anything. And then I have this synth over here. Again, when the kick comes in, it just doesn't work. So in this case, I'm going to move the synth over to where the blank space is. And you can see this is a little bit longer of a riff. So I'm just going to cut it a little bit so that that goes right into the saxophone. So that is essentially what the project is. You have the first 8 measures is your first A section where you introduce your original voices. In the second 8 measures from 9 to 16, through 16, through the end of 16 up to 17, is you're going to have the entire, whatever all your instruments are, you're going to have them present. They don't have to play the entire time. I would highly recommend for them not to play the entire time, especially if you have things like effects, like saxophone or this drum fill that kind of you want to scoop out some of the other volume, some of the other instruments because there's too much happening, and that is all flowing right into 16 into 17. There's no breaks, there's no fade outs, there is nothing. I want a direct sequence, of sounds. You go from your original A into something completely new. And that plays, and then goes right back into A. So you can see there's a little bit at the end. But that's essentially the project where you have your section A again, new section B, right over here, and then A repeats at the end. If you would like it, you can certainly change the color of this so that they are a little clearer. You can kind of decipher the different instruments and what they are. And then let's put this one blue. Let's make it purple, right? So it's just easier on the eyes. You can tell where everything is. Soundtrap does that on its own, and same thing. You just want to find some, again, effect buildup. Like this is pretty cool. It's a pretty cool effect, but just kind of repeats 4 times. So you don't want to use the effects all the time because the more effects you use, the less of an effect it has overall. You want effects to, you want them sometimes. Didn't mean for that to happen, but if you do strings, like this could be a nice dramatic fill. Some of these are MIDI. This is what's happening here. So as opposed to just an audio, if you zoom in on this, is just a regular audio sound wave as we've studied them. This is a MIDI track, which doesn't have the sound waves, right? It just actually has notes. If you double click on it, you can actually see notes and you can adjust the notes. You can import these as well. There's no criteria. So in this case, if you were to double this, right, create another loop, adjust it. This is maybe your main melody, but you cannot put a MIDI into your regular audio. So you can see this is just regular audio, and this is kind of a different type of a wave file, right? So let's find some other instruments. Let's find some. If you want, you can certainly use some vocals. Well, that was that. Again, some of these are not going to necessarily line up with this. Ooh, zither. So again, these are all different types of melodies, but if you add this in a little later, maybe you don't want the strings right away. Maybe the original was actually pretty good, but again, you have 4 different sounds, and you can add effect to some of these. What I don't want is for this to be silent, right? If you're going from measure 16, 17, from 16 into 17, I don't want silence. This is what I do not want. There's nothing happening. I want this to be a direct transition. So while you are able to certainly use, fades, let's say you want to fade this in over the course of the 2 measures while this EDM is building up, and then you have a nice, zither, which is a very cool instrument you should check out. But for example, I'll play the last 2 measures. Oops. So that's exactly the same thing, except for these are now, or specifically these 3 are MIDI files as opposed to regular audio files like this one is. So they just have to be on separate tracks. If you want, this being a sound effect, I don't really have a sound effect, but you can put it with a salsa because that's kind of the same pattern. So in this case, if you want, you can delete this track. So in this case, this is the same thing. You have an introduction for the first 8 measures, then you have your full instruments present, melodies all out. That doesn't mean that you need to play everything all at once. You still want to limit your, especially effects. You don't want to have the effects playing the entire time. Then you have a new melody. If you want, you can start with 1 instrument. If you want to start because you have 4 playing, like I do here, with this section, it doesn't mean that you have to start with 1 and do the, introduction again. You're going straight into the middle of your piece. So it's a little different, but that's essentially the same, the same idea. If you want to start with 1 instrument, you can certainly fade out and make it different. If you're starting with some effects, I kind of made this a very rigid 32 measures. If you want to have, a 1 or 2 measure introduction as you play with some effects and your melody doesn't start until measure 3, or you want to have a 4 measure introduction that is not part of the, initial melody, right? You can certainly play around with that, but for the sake of simplicity, just put your introduction in the first 8 measures. The second 8 measures is your first full melody. All the instruments are present. Then it goes back or it goes into a new melody for section 17 to 24, which is your B section. And then you have a repetition, a repeat of either the second measure. As things start to fade out, should be kind of like the opposite, but it doesn't have to be. You can make it something, as long as you're using the same instruments, the same loops, you could do something new with it. So that's your introduction for this. So you're going to, again, once you create the first 8 sections, you're going to copy it to 16, as we did here. You're going to stagger the loop entrances to create a layering effect. So again, same thing. You start with 1, you add a second, you add a third, you add a fourth. You're not bringing all the instruments all at once. That loses the effect, and it's hard for the listener to figure out what's going on if you have so many different things. If you introduce them one by one, it's a little easier to understand. Like, same thing you do in a movie or a book. If you're reading and you're learning about one character, and then he meets a second character, and then he meets a third character, then the second one goes away, you meet a fourth one. It's just easier to keep track of what's happening as opposed to, 4, 5, 6 characters being introduced all at the same time. It gets confusing. It's the same thing with music. You don't want all of that happening all at the same time, everything starting at the same time. So that's pretty much the project. Let's go over some of the other requirements. Copy the A section, make sure to 25 to 32. You work on your out, right? Your outro, how it's going to end. Then you're going to create a completely new B section, different loops, but similar sounds or instruments. You want something that sounds like it's part of the original project. You don't want to, necessarily have something very heavy and then something that may not fit musically or thematically. You can play around with this. There's it should sound like it's one piece of music as opposed to having a piece of music in the beginning, then a different piece of music that's completely different style, and then going back to the original. You still want it to feel like piece one piece of music, one composition, as opposed to why is that here. So especially if you fade everything out over here and then you fade everything in, then you're starting from the transitions aren't good. So make sure that you are going right into a new melody. And the last stuff, again, include at least 2 fade in or fade outs. I want you to play with volume. If you don't want to do a complete fade in, fade out, you won't have to. But play around with volumes. You can do this the same way that you did with these sounds. Remember, you can open this, automation, go volume, and then you can add dots and adjust volumes manually. This, for example. You don't have to do that, but I want you to play with volumes. I want you to include at least 2 fade-ins and fade-outs. Experiment, as much as you want. I know it's field week, and it's going to be nice for a few days at least, but I want you to spend some time and really just listen through a lot of loops. There's 8,000 loops. They're all a couple seconds each, but there's a ton of loops, and just want you to find something you like, not just the first thing that sounds good to you. In Mixcraft, you're going to click File, Mix Down, the same thing you always do. File, Mix Down to MP3. Make sure that nothing is soloed or muted so you can hear all of your tracks. In Soundtrap, same thing. Make sure nothing is selected or unselected that you don't want. File, Export, Project to MP3. Because this is an original composition, you do need a title. It is part of your assignment. You need an original title. And don't just put original loops. That's not a title. I will take a few points off, and you won't fail, but I will take a few points off if the title is not creative. And same thing that you always do again, zoom out to show the entire project and take a screenshot. You should have, in terms of loops, you should have like a line of loops, especially for the A sections. It's all the same stuff. You shouldn't need to put, only one loop on each track, especially if it's the same loop. It should be on the same thing. I understand if you want to make a few extra tracks here. Let's say you add one of these tracks, and this mandolin is going to be down here, for example. What I don't want you to do is just to leave all of this blank and create, or leave all of this blank and create 4 or 5, 6 new loops and then have 12 different tracks. You could do the entire project on 6 tracks. I will be able to see and hear the difference when you're changing your sections from A to B. That should be I'll be able to hear it, and I'll be able to see it as well. But again, you want to zoom out to show the entire project, especially important in this because there is no specific button. So if you're zoomed in like this, I can't see the project, you will lose a few points. Make sure you zoom out, scroll to the beginning, zoom out again, make sure you can fit the entire project. You can click on this to close it. So when you zoom in, you can view the entire project and you can, do whatever you want really at that point. But as long as I can see the entire project and I can see the sections, everything works out. In Mixcraft, easy, press 0. In this case, I have the line over here. So if you rewind back to start, press 0. Or maybe it's just limited, but that's fine. Press 0, zoom out, take a screenshot, upload screenshot and audio with the original title in Classroom. This is one of the bigger projects, 150 points. Must be 32 measures in length. If it's 33, 34, because you decided to have a longer intro, longer outro, I'm not gonna take points off. But if you did something, it's 165 measures because you have to follow the measures at the top. Make sure you're in beats in Mixcraft, not time. That's going to make it very challenging for you if it's not in beats. In Soundtrap, you can't even turn that off. You just have the measures right at the top. Make sure that you're following the measure numbers. So it has to be exactly 32 measures. Composition must be in AABA form with each section is 8 measures. Again, that's about 30 points. Layering, staggering your voices, entrances, and the use of fades is worth 35 points. And I want you to use different types of loops. So I want one or two melodic loops, one bass or a rhythmic loop, and 2 to 3. I gave you kind of different criteria here. So 1 to 2 percussion loops here. Let's put 2 to 3. Use your judgment. I don't want to tell you what instruments you have to use. Just use your judgment. Something sounds good. If you only have piano loops and there's no bass, no rhythm, no percussion, if you only use piano loops, it's probably not going to sound good, but you will lose a few points just for not having variety. So there's a lot to pick from. There's sound effects. There's a lot of really cool stuff that I want you to experiment with. And finally, submission of the project with original title, and the screenshot of the full project is worth about 20 points. That's it.